history of the Witcher series is unique and a must-see, and if PressX says so, don't hesitate. This is a guarantee of quality. A video is a video. Long, short, usual. Doesn't matter. If I have to choose between one video and another, then I prefer not to choose, but watch them all.
Each of us had our first Witcher. For someone, it was Henry Cavill from the Netflix series. Someone got acquainted with him with the help of a book series, and someone watched an old Polish TV series with Michael Żebrowski. Nevertheless, it's impossible to deny a significant contribution to the world fame of the game version of The Witcher from CD Projekt Red. And if the third part of the game has been sitting deep in the hearts of gamers for 10 years and is still perfectly played, then the first two parts have aged more, and it's even a little bit painful to play them now. This is especially true for the first part. Not just CD Projekt Red took up its remake. Therefore, today we start on our journey throughout the world of The Witcher from the very beginning, and you can decide for yourself whether to go through the first parts of the series. How does D&D relate to The Witcher? What could the first part of the franchise have been and become? And how did Andrzej Sapkowski screw up when he sold the rights to the game? You'll get answers to all these questions within the next 2 hours of this video. Welcome to PressX. Prepare Witcher potions and snacks. It will be an interesting story. Few people know that the first version of the Witcher game was supposed to be born back in 1998, long before CD Projekt Red started working on it. The fact is that the CD Projekt Red company itself didn't actually exist at that time and was only at the stage of its formation. Today, no one is surprised that books became a source of inspiration for movies and video games, but the first Witcher was not based on the world-famous bestseller book, but on a series of short stories that, in fact, people now sit down to read after they've already played the game. The first story of the Polish writer Andrzej Sapkowski was published in 1986 in the Polish science fiction and fantasy magazine Fantastica Fiction. You could count on your fingers all available computer games in socialist Poland of that time. It was a cherished dream to have your own computer at home, not to mention in all the possibilities for creating video games. The economic situation of the country at that time was no different from other countries of the socialist camp. Low wages, 10 times less than in Western European countries. The population had enough money for basic goods, the variety of these goods was limited, and it was almost impossible to get such a thing as a personal computer. Only when the Iron Curtain collapsed, the situation improved and Western goods, equipment, including the first home computers, ZX Spectrum and Amiga, which read floppy disks instead of disks, gradually began to flow into Poland. It wasn't impossible to get games at all at that time, but it was very difficult to do. By the way, before floppy disks, games, like other information, were stored on tape cassettes. It was easy to copy the information from the cassette with a regular tape recorder at home. So at that time, video games were easy to copy to friends. In some places, games were even broadcast on the radio as an audio signal, and anyone could record a few hours of signal on tape, insert the recording into a computer, and play the game. That was the childhood of Marcin Iwiński, an ordinary guy who had an entrepreneurial streak since childhood. Since there was no copyright law in Poland until 1994, in high school, Marcin started selling pirated copies of games in Warsaw markets, thus earning his first money. He even bought himself an internet modem, which was considered a luxury thing in those days. So Marcin became a full-fledged pirate who downloaded dozens of games from the internet and recorded them on cassettes at home. However, people in those days had no alternative, so Marcin's business went up. Subsequently, the guy bought himself an optical drive to record information already on CD-ROMs. Around the same time in high school, Iwiński met Michał Kaczynski, who did the same thing, sold illegal copies of games. They became friends and decided to work together. And most importantly, they decided to work legally. So in 1994, Marcin came up with the idea to create his own company. The name spoke for itself, CD Projekt, the first official importer of video game discs in Poland. It's funny that former pirates created a company that would later find itself on the other side of the market and feel all the disadvantages of piracy for itself. However, that was how the video game world developed in the early 90s in Eastern Europe. It's thanks to piracy that computer games and later their development became so popular in Poland, Ukraine, and other countries. It's easy to draw a parallel in the story of Sergei Grigorovich and his studio behind the creation of Stalker. By the way, we also have a separate video about that on the channel. We recommend watching it next. Returning to the topic, Marcin and Michał spent only $2,000 to create CD Projekt. For the company's office, they rented an apartment for free from a friend. Marcin even sold his inherited land plot to invest in the company. Iwinski and Kaczynski imported games from US retailers and were the first to bring games on CD to Poland. For a long time, CD Projekt was the only Polish company specializing in the release of video games and educational programs, as well as partial localization of games and products. However, their main challenge was combating video game piracy. The founders experienced firsthand the frustration of seeing their hard work copied and sold for a fraction of its value.
Everyone's thinking it, I'm just saying it. Pirates.
CD Projekt quickly gained its first success thanks to the innovative nature of its activities. At that time, not many people in Poland knew English, yet computer games and programs were exclusively in English. With only a small fan base for computer games in the country and pirates able to crack any game in a day, no one wanted to invest in official Polish localization. It simply wasn't economically viable. Distributors were afraid that they would spend money on a license, translation, voice acting, marketing, because the next day the result of their work would be sold for free by pirates, 10 times cheaper, and they themselves would not even see that small part of the money. Foreign publishers were aware of this situation in the Polish market and were reluctant to open their representative offices there, make localizations, or look for distributors. This is where CD Projekt's innovation and boldness came into play. They decided to fill this gap, fight piracy, and demonstrate by their own example that computer games could also be successfully published in Poland. So in 1996, CD Projekt managed to agree on partial localization of games by developers such as 7 Stars and Lyrics Longsoft, and a year later they agreed on full localization. According to Iwinski, one of the most successful was the localization of the adventure game Ace Ventura, the CD-ROM game. If previous games with localizations sold hundreds of copies, then Ace Ventura sold thousands and significantly improved their profit and recognition. And most importantly, foreign publishers could not reach even those thousands of sales and felt the need to cooperate with CD Projekt. Thus, the company began to gain a reputation, and soon the guys turned to BioWare and the well-known publisher Interplay Entertainment with a proposal for making the Polish localization of Baldur's Gate, an RPG game based on the mechanics of the tabletop Dungeons & Dragons. They expected the game to become popular in Poland and felt that there was no local publisher that would be able to translate the entire text of the game from English to Polish. Well, you know how much text is inside it, however, it can hardly compete with the third part of the game, which has 2 million words in its script. So CD Projekt went all in. They agreed with the publisher of D&D to provide them with a code of rules so that developers could put it in the game box. They also put a printed map of the world in a box and thus created a cheap version of the collectible edition of the game. CD Projekt hired famous Polish actors to voice the characters of the game, which was supposed to attract even more attention to translation and play in the country, and they did not lose. Despite the fact that the pirates quickly copied the game and sold it for pennies, the licensed version of Baldur's Gate sold 18,000 copies in Poland on the day of release, and the total number of sales of the game in the country reached 50,000. Interplay did not believe that this was possible and were pleased with the results. They decided to continue working with CD Projekt after the release of the original Baldur's Gate. Martin and Michael then focused on creating a port for the sequel Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance from the PlayStation 2 and Xbox consoles to PC. For this purpose, CD Projekt hired 2 developers, Sebastian Zielinski and Adam Badalski. However, half a year after starting work on the port, Interplay began to experience financial difficulties and was forced to cancel the PC version of the game. At this point, we'll switch from the guys from CD Projekt and tell you about another Polish company, Metropolis Software, which in the mid-90s already had about 20 full-time employees and managed to develop a couple of simple adventure games. Things were going well in the company, and in 1997 they released a horizontal scrolling shooter, Catharsis, the publisher of which, by the way, was CD Projekt. In 1997, Metropolis Software received a license to develop a video game based on the Witcher literary series, which at that time already included 6 books. The first game about The Witcher was supposed to be released in 1998. Initially, the project was planned in the usual genre for Metropolis, an action-adventure game. The developers did not even think about any RPG at that time, but it's probably worth remembering what The Witcher's literary universe is all about. At the time of writing the first story, Andrzej Sapkowski was a traveling fur merchant with an economic education and a love for science fiction literature. This is why the economy in the Witcher universe occupies a prominent place. Andrzej once participated in a short story contest and took third place, though he believed his story was the best. The judges likely found his story unsuitable for the fantasy genre in Poland at that time, which was focused on children, as Sapkowski's story was too obscene and cruel. But that's how The Witcher was born. The author recalls, quote, "Back then in Poland, fantasy was considered something for stupid children who couldn't even masturbate properly. So they said, this story is the best, but it is fantasy, so let's give him the third award. But jurors are jurors. They are mostly stupid, they are mostly biased. But the public, the impact of The Witcher on the Polish fandom was tremendous, absolutely tremendous. And everybody said, more. Over time, more works were linked to The Witcher, eventually forming a full-fledged franchise that began to be replenished with complete novels. The main character was Geralt of Rivia, a Witcher endowed with enhanced physical strength, endurance, mental stability, and magical skills acquired through a certain mutation. It was a kind of fantastic detective story, Sherlock Holmes solving mystical cases and hunting otherworldly creatures, mainly from Slavic mythology. Andrzej Sapkowski considered Slavic culture to be very rich, although he does not have specific preferences when choosing folklore, mythology, or bestiary. He tries to discard existing elements and invent something new himself. The biggest mistake that a not quite experienced writer made in his life happened in 1997 when signing an agreement with Metropolis Software. According to the studio's founder, Adrian Chmielars, Sapkowski was not interested in a future game based on his own franchise. He was only interested in the monetary value of the license. This gave Metropolis a certain freedom in development to make the game as they see it. For almost a year, the developers worked on the Witcher game, managed to complete one game level with the purple Geralt model, prepared materials for the press, and found the publisher Topware Interactive. But that marked the end of their fervor. If Metropolis had been working on 3 other games simultaneously in addition to The Witcher, the developers wouldn't have burned out and shelved the project. Topware also added fuel to the fire. The video game publisher was afraid that the Slavic nature of the game would not gain popularity in the world. We can imagine how they later apologized to developers. It was like, spoiler alert, no one apologizes in such cases in game development. However, according to Chmielars, the future Witcher was simply lost among everything that the company developed in the period 1998 to 1999. Therefore, the game was not canceled, but simply postponed until better times. Somewhere in 2002, the founders of CD Projekt, which had been exclusively engaged in game localization for the past few years, earned some money and thought about whether to start developing and releasing games themselves. There was no enthusiasm to just continue distributing games, but the code for the canceled PC version of Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance was in the hands of developers and belonged to CD Projekt. So the company decided to use it to develop its first original computer game. CD Projekt knew that role-playing games sold well in Poland and the company's employees liked to play games like Baldur's Gate, so they decided to create a fantasy role-playing game. After analyzing the book market in search of some good Polish fantasy novels, the choice fell on the already very popular books in Eastern Europe about The Witcher by Andrzej Sapkowski. Their stories captured the entire CD Projekt team, so it was decided to take the books as the basis for the future project. But as you know, earlier the rights to the franchise were already sold to Metropolis Software, which abandoned its development. No one knew about it. Therefore, in 2002, CD Projekt applied for the rights to the game series directly to Sapkowski. They managed to acquire the rights for almost 35,000 zlotys, which was equal to $9,500. At the same time, according to Kaczynski, neither he nor Iwinski at that time had any idea how to develop games at all. Sapkowski wanted to get all the money in advance and not in the form of fees, although the developers offered him the second option. Somewhere in this period of time, the development of the game by Metropolis Studios finally sank into oblivion. By the way, it's interesting that after the release of the Witcher game in 2008, the Metropolis company itself would be acquired by CD Projekt, and in a year the employees would become one team altogether and the Metropolis studio would cease to exist. But this wouldn't happen soon, and in the meantime, the development process of the first Witcher game had begun in the small office of CD Projekt, located in an industrial park in the east of Warsaw. After acquiring the rights to develop the game, in 2002, CD Projekt created its own studio located in Lodz, which was called CD Projekt Red. Sebastian Zielinski was appointed head of the studio before starting development. The company needed developers, designers, animators, and screenwriters. CD Projekt Red actively hired new employees. But the company's biggest challenge at the time was finding a publisher for the game, and while Levinsky and Kaczynski were looking for a publisher, the team developed the first demo prototype of the game. It was made on an engine created by one of the company's developers when he was working on the first-person shooter Mortar by the Polish studio Mirage Media. Mortar was released in 1999. A year later, though, the studio closed and the developer moved to the ranks of CD Projekt Red. Actually, the Mortar engine did not allow much, so the Witcher demo version consisted of 4 areas with several enemies in them. A typical role-playing game with a top view, reminiscent of Dark Alliance and Diablo. Adam Badowski, who is now known today as the director of the studio's latest and most ambitious project at the moment, Cyberpunk 2077, was responsible for the concept of the first Witcher. According to Adam, the first demo of the game was a piece of crap, and it was this demo that Levinsky and Kaczynski had to show to publishers who, one by one, refused CD Projekt Red.
We were telling them from the very beginning, hey, we'll not give up the IP, we finance the project ourselves, we finance it for 3 years, we can still continue. They didn't know that we are burning through the last remains of our money,
Right.
and you know, the distribution cannot provide enough already for a group of 50, 60 people per month. That was a super stressful time for me in my life, because I was putting a lot of effort. I was constantly traveling, they were flying here, we were preparing for all this. You know, sometimes they had due diligence that was lasting for 3 days. At a certain point, I was getting a call, and it was the call I was really waiting for, and before it was like, hey, we need more time, blah, 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 blah. So time is passing, we are burning through the money, and then they call us, hey, margin going, la, 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 la. And then, you know, I'm really sorry, however, and you know, you get it once, twice, but you get it 7 times from all the top names. You think like, are we doing something wrong?
According to Martin, the reason was money. When you have it, there's a queue for you, but when you need it, few are ready to come to your aid. In Poland, CD Projekt could have just released the game themselves, but for a global release, which involved opening local offices, establishing distributor relations, and localization, they lacked the capacity. While waiting to sign a contract with a publisher, CD Projekt Red closed its office in Lodz and relocated all employees to an office in Warsaw. Everyone, except Zielinski, left the team, and Mikhail Kaczynski became the project lead. Ultimately, the studio reached an agreement with Atari, which had extensive experience producing RPG games and knew how to maximize outcomes from partnerships. It took 6 months for CD Projekt to finalize the deal. Atari changed the terms 4 times and repeatedly demanded additional materials, despite Martin calling the publisher every week. At one point, the deal nearly fell through. Levinsky recalls.
The legal bill was kind of small for this one. It was, I don't know, $60,000, $70,000? And we are tiny,
Yeah.
you know, it's the first deal. And even at the very end, they wanted to extract some stuff out of that. I still have the letter which we called their bluff, and we sold to send it to the management board, where we told them that if this is the way, like in a very nice, polite way, if it's the way they want to handle it, we'll just walk away and wish them all the best of luck with their future endeavors.
Finally, after several months of negotiations, the deal was concluded for a decent amount, and CD Projekt Red could safely continue developing the game. The Witcher demo version was rejected, and first of all, the team started working on a new engine. As you know, the developers already had in their hands the BioWare Studio engine, Aurora engine, designed to port Dark Alliance to PC. However, it still had to be greatly refined in order to optimize it to meet the requirements of the game developers. So, for example, one of the most important improvements to Aurora was the development of the team's internal game space in Autodesk 3ds Max. Instead of using a tile-based system, the team created a game environment in 3ds Max and immediately exported it to the game engine. This made the locations different from each other. The space turned out to be more diverse than if you had used the same tile objects in different places over and over again. The developers also worked on the lighting in 3ds Max so that the shadows in the game became more realistic and provided better performance of the game itself. Modeling of object and process physics has also been improved, added the ability to animate with motion capture, a new combat system and mechanics, new graphic effects such as radiance, blur, and dynamism with shadows. In addition, the developers added a separate tool to the engine, Texture Paint, which allowed developers to draw the game environment using their own textures. All this affected the ability to add realistic skyboxes and water effects to the game, which were already developed specifically for The Witcher. Natural light was dynamic and changed throughout the day, just as the weather shifted from clear skies to rain and thunderstorms. To enhance the game's atmosphere, developers also included a day-night cycle. Despite the inexperience of the young team and minor conflicts during the revision of the engine, due to radically different views on the future project, the team coped with the goal. The lack of a unified vision and common organization of the development process was evident, and in general, it took almost 2 years. The development team, which initially consisted of 15 people, expanded to almost 100, which cost the company an additional 20 million zlotys. The project budget exceeded expectations, and according to Iwinski, some content from the game had to be removed. Fortunately, this did not affect the key characters of the game in any way. Interestingly, since the team only had 100 employees anyway, many of them did a few different things. For example, Marcin Blasha, who was hired as a designer, recalled that he initially worked on narratives and very often wrote short dialogues for NPCs, or even came up with the names of potions. However, the game was developed despite significant difficulties. By the way, BioWare Studio, whose engine was used by CD Projekt Red, not only gave it a license right, but also in a certain sense took a young company under its wing and helped CD Projekt promote the game. BioWare liked the project of Polish developers, so they offered them a place on their own stand during the video game exhibition Electronic Entertainment Expo 2004, next to their role-playing game Jade Empire.
Impressive. Clearly, I have been too dismissive in my search.
BioWare employees themselves advised journalists to approach their stand to look at the future Witcher. Polish developers in turn showed journalists a game demo which was already very close to the final version of the game, but the release was still far away. For 3 whole years, the developers rewrote the plot and modified the game character, which was originally not planned as a white wolf at all. However, the developers still chose Geralt for the role of the main character. Interestingly, while no one around the world knew about the upcoming game, in Poland, fans of Sapkowski's works could not wait for its release of The Witcher. The picture, in a sense, was very similar to the expectations of Stalker, except that the developers did not postpone the release dates twice a year. On August 31st, 2006, Atari announced its intention to distribute and publish the game in Europe and Asia. However, for another 6 months, the issue of releasing the game in North America was open and was resolved with the Atari subsidiary only on February 5th, 2007. But the work on The Witcher did not end there because the US version needed its own localization and was subjected to some censorship. We'll talk about this in more detail later, but in the meantime, it's time to find out what the first Witcher was all about. How exactly did he win the hearts of millions of fans? What story did the developers of CD Projekt Red come up with? And does it correspond to the book canon? We'll learn about this by immersing ourselves in the plot of the game. The story of The Witcher, with a bright yellow-eyed man named Geralt, begins with a cinematic that tells the story described in Sapkowski's first short story in the collection The Last Wish. A professional monster hunter, the Witcher, Geralt, arrives in Vizima, the capital of the Kingdom of Temerian. The fact is that there's a Striga in the city, and King Foltest wants to cure it because this is his daughter. He promises a high reward to those who cope with this. Therefore, Geralt undertakes to remove the curse, and he succeeds. Immediately after that, events are postponed in time for several years ahead. Wounded Geralt runs in the pouring rain in the forest and, having lost his strength, falls to the ground. Half-dead Geralt is found on the side of the road by his Witcher brothers. They put the hero on a cart and take him to Kaer Morhen, the Witcher's castle, located in the north of the Blue Mountains. There, Geralt comes to his senses and realizes he does not remember anything, neither who he is nor how he got there. It looks like some kind of hangover after the heavy potion. His old friend, the sorceress Triss Marigold, is trying to cure this amnesia of the hero. In general, Kaer Morhen, where the Witcher's School of the Wolf is located, is a rather remote and safe place that's difficult for any monster, let alone a person, to get into. But be that as it may, immediately after Geralt wakes up, a group of unknown people attacks the castle. They turn out to be Salamandra robbers, under the command of the so-called Professor, who brought with him a couple of sorcerers and a powerful chimera. The Witchers were shocked because they did not understand why anyone would attack Kaer Morhen. There's simply nothing to steal here. But the fact is that Witchers are mutants by nature.
Witches.
And since they are mutants, their body's able to absorb a variety of mutagens and adapt to the actions of potions and poisons, which are deadly to the body of an ordinary person. Witchers have kept the secrets of mutagens hidden for centuries, passing them down from generation to generation. It was for these mutagens that the Professor came. However, he's only the right-hand man of the powerful Zerrikania sorcerer and alchemist Azar-Javed, the mysterious leader of the Salamandra. A battle ensues between the robbers and the Witchers, resulting in the Professor managing to steal the key mutagens of the School of the Wolf. But more interestingly, they manage to steal formulas that describe in detail the process of creating Witchers. The youngest student of the Witcher School of the Wolf, Leo, tried to stop the Professor, but the leader of the robbers shot the future Witcher, as a result of which Leo dies. Well, with everything stolen, the Professor manages to escape. The Zerrikanian magician Azar-Javed turned out to be too powerful and strong even for the sorceress Triss. She was wounded, so the Witchers will treat her for a while. Vesemir, the oldest Witcher, decides it's time to leave Kaer Morhen. Immediately after that, the Witchers decide that they need to split up and go in search of the stolen goods and the intruders themselves. Geralt goes south and later finds himself in the vicinity of Vizima. On the way to Vizima, Geralt meets a gifted boy, Alvin, and his friend Shani, whom he doesn't remember. From her, he learns that he will not be able to get to Vizima itself since the plague is spreading through the lands of Temeria and the gates of the city are closed for quarantine. Geralt needs a special pass, that is, a certificate with which he's allowed to enter Vizima. In search of such a certificate, Geralt meets local believers led by a priest who tell him about a mysterious beast that is terrorizing them. The Witcher agrees to help the locals get rid of the monster. In search of the reason for the monster's appearance, the Witcher meets an old friend, the dwarf Zoltan Shivai. From him, Geralt learns that another Witcher, Berengar, has recently come to the settlement. He, at the request of the priest, was already trying to get rid of the beast and then suddenly disappeared. Eventually, Geralt learns that a local witch named Abigail is being blamed for everything. Geralt comes to the conclusion that the inhabitants of the settlement, without realizing it, led to the appearance of the beast by their actions, and now he had to choose for himself: trust the locals and let the crowd decide Abigail's fate, or take her side and protect the witch. In the second case, he would have to kill all the peasants, but if this is not done, the locals reward Geralt with a pass to Vizima for destroying the beast. Actually, whatever the main character chooses, he will not be able to get into the city. After all, at the entrance to Vizima, Geralt is already waiting for the guards who are ordered to put the Witcher in prison. There in the dungeons, Geralt sees the already familiar face of the Professor, who is released by the guards after bail is paid by influential people. Geralt is outraged by this injustice, but soon the guards are looking for a volunteer who is promised freedom if he agrees to kill Cockatrice, a monster that has settled in the sewers. Of course, Geralt agrees to this. Once in the sewer, the Witcher meets Siegfried, a Grand Master of the Order of the Flaming Rose, who offers Geralt help in killing the Cockatrice. In general, it's interesting why Siegfried himself was in the sewer. In any case, they easily coped with the Cockatrice and went in search of a way out of the sewer. But at this point, they're attacked by Salamandra bandits. This makes Geralt wonder who might have sent them to him at all, because only a few people knew about his agreement with the prison captain. Then Siegfried advises Geralt to visit a private investigator, Raymond Marleve, who's located nearby in the temple quarter of the city, also the poorest area of Vizima. During a conversation with Raymond, Geralt learns the true identity of his antagonist. The man who stole the mutagens from the Witchers is the most powerful Zerrikanian sorcerer, Azar-Javed, who possesses not only great power but also a network of useful connections across the continent. A gang of Salamandra robbers is engaged in genetic experiments and appears to be planning some kind of political coup. Raymond Marleve fully supports Geralt's initiative to find and stop Salamandra because he has long dreamed of doing so. The detective holds a grudge against Salamandra for killing his wife a few years ago and turning his son into a terrible monster. Now, Raymond wants revenge on them. The detective's suspicion of collusion with Azar-Javed falls on Vincent Meiss, the captain of the city guard, who closed the case related to Salamandra and often disappears mysteriously. However, the detective has done little to help Geralt, and the Witcher has yet to uncover the truth. The only clue that piques his interest leads him to St. Labioda's hospital, where one of the informants of the Salamandra gang is imprisoned under guard. Geralt bribes the guards to get a chance to talk to the prisoner, but he suddenly becomes very ill. The informant begins to convulse, and only one word comes out of his mouth: Kalkstein. Soon after, local thugs led by Jeremiah Trick break into the hospital, planning to kill the informant. Therefore, Jeremiah himself is now among the suspects. Geralt returns to Detective Raymond, but at that very moment, the detective is attacked by Salamandra. Geralt helps him fight back, and Raymond admits that he is in danger, saying that Salamandra bandits are on his trail, and he needs to disappear from the city for a while. The Witcher himself leaves the city to search for other clues, but upon returning to Vizima, he is met by a boy who says that Mr. Morleave is looking for him. Geralt comes to the detective's house and notices something strange. His chest medallion of wolf begins to react to the approach to Raymond Morleave. The detective also adds fuel to the fire. He starts asking for payment for his information, which he's never done before.
Oh, my memory ain't so great.
Oh, yeah? Maybe this will refresh your memory.
I don't know, it's still kind of hazy.
How about this?
Yeah, I remember him. I used to see him around. Why do you want to know?
I can't tell you that.
Well, maybe this'll help.
I really don't think I should.
Yeah, you still don't think so?
Suspecting something is amiss in the detective's behavior, Geralt decides to test one of his theories. He wants to see the only closed place in Vizima, the old cemetery where not only the dead, but also those who have risen from the dead can, quote, live, so to speak. Due to the increasing frequency of strange attacks on people in the city, the captain of the city guard has ordered the cemetery to be closed. Now you can only enter it with the personal permission of Vincent Mice, and Geralt suspects him of colluding with Salamandra. Fortunately, the Witcher manages to find facts that restore Vincent's unblemished reputation as a fearless and honest crime fighter. As a reward for Geralt killing the cockatrice in the sewers, the captain of the Vizima guards began to assist the Witcher in his investigation. So he gives Geralt a pass to the cemetery without any problems. Either intuition or a sixth sense, Geralt did not fail, and in one of the dark rooms of the crypt, he finds the lifeless body of Detective Morleave. Turns out that the real Raymond has been killed, and someone is defiantly using his appearance. This someone actually turns out to be Azar Javed, who, with the help of his abilities, decided to realize his dark plans and commit crimes by someone else's hands. Geralt returns to the false Dimitri, that is, to the pseudo-detective, and tries to pretend he does not know anything yet. He says that he considers the thug Jeremiah a suspect, and the imposter detective completely agrees with him and advises him to simply kill him.
Yes?
I'm ready for Ramsmate.
Good. He leads Salamandra's armed force. You have to kill him.
Won't be easy, but I'll try.
Actually, Jeremiah's gang of thugs hate Salamandra supporters almost as much as Geralt, so it's no surprise that Azar wants to get rid of Jeremiah. And in addition, the fictitious Raymond Morleave tells the Witcher that the imprisoned informant Salamandra died a few days ago. Geralt decides not to rush things and look for more clues. There was a possibility that Azar Javed and the talented alchemist Kalkstein, whose name was given to Geralt by an imprisoned informant, may be closely related. Geralt visits the hospital again in search of a doctor who can perform an autopsy and determine the cause of death of the informant. A red-haired medic from Redania, an old friend of Geralt and part-time mistress of the Witcher, Shani, comes to the aid of the hero. She kindly agrees to help Geralt, after which he agrees with the cemetery employee to also kindly deliver the informant's body to the hospital walls. The cemetery employee is not used to asking unnecessary questions and promises to deliver the body at midnight. Soon after examining the wounds on the informant's body, Shani comes to the conclusion that he was poisoned, and then the Salamandra tried to hide the evidence and additionally mutilated the victim. So behind the poisoning is the sorcerer alchemist Azar Javed himself. Meanwhile, tensions in the region are growing. An attack is being prepared on Vizima, and the combined forces of dwarves and elves are collecting resources and weapons for this. Upon learning of this, the self-proclaimed leader of humanity, Grand Master of the Order of the Flaming Rose, Jacques de Aldesberg, sends a detachment of infantrymen to investigate to break up a possible uprising. Siegfried, whom Geralt met in the sewers, is among the infantrymen. Meeting a Witcher in the forest, he offers Geralt to lead a squad, but he refuses. After all, he's a Witcher, not a soldier. Geralt returns to Detective Morleave, fully aware of who he really is and what he's up to. The hero pretends to be a fool and invents a fables for Raymond Javed as if it is the alchemist Kalkstein who is behind the murder of the informant. Azar Morliev happily believes outright lies and advises Geralt to visit Kalkstein. In addition, he mentions a tower located in the swamps, which, according to him, contains great power. He suggests using the books and scrolls hidden in the tower as bait for the alchemist. In fact, the tower does have a certain power and causes all the weak creatures passing by to turn into monsters. We will return to the history of this tower today, but in the meantime, Geralt found Kalkstein. After a brief dialogue, the Witcher set out in search of all the elements needed to open the tower. And at the same time, he destroyed a powerful stone golem that acted as the guardian of the tower. Why is Geralt working on this tower at all? And why not just get together in a duel with Azar Javed? The fact is that Azar is a strong sorcerer whose spells are associated with a separate element, and his element is fire. That is why, in order to completely deprive the sorcerer of his strength, Geralt decides to lure him to the tower in the swamps. After examining the structure and having the necessary information for Azar in his hands, Geralt goes outside.
You'll soon learn the truth. Excited?
More than you think. Just one question. Where did you get the idea to assume Raymond's identity?
Clever. From you, of course. He was getting close and you trusted him.
The Witcher reveals the true face of Azar, and soon a battle begins between them. During Geralt's battle with Javed, a professor suddenly appears. He helps the sorcerer, but they have to escape because Azar's fire magic has been weakened by the tower and the swamps, that is, by the water element. With the help of the professor's portal, they're transported to the trade quarter, and the stunned Geralt is unable to continue the battle. Meanwhile, there are really difficult times in Temeria. Siegfried's military detachment tracked down the inhumane troops, and a bloody battle began between them. Many of the Order's infantrymen were killed, but the humans managed to break the alliance of elves and dwarves. Geralt wakes up in the private chambers of the sorceress Triss Merigold in the affluent part of Vizima, the trade quarter. Triss accidentally found the Witcher while investigating a magical anomaly near the tower, and already from her, the hero learns that after the battle with Javed and the Professor, a fierce battle took place between the Order of the Flaming Rose and the Skoyatael, a partisan movement of the older people, that is, elves and inhumans fighting for their freedom and equal rights. But despite everything that is happening around her, Triss is really interested in the anomaly that has miraculously passed from the swamps to the city. Geralt undertakes to solve this problem and installs several magic sensors around the city that indicate the cause of the appearance of magical radiation. Its source was a boy named Alvin, whom Geralt had already met on the outskirts of Vizima. Geralt brings the boy to Triss, and he goes to a social reception where he is invited by the Nilfgaardian merchant Leuvarden. Declan Leuvarden is a longtime friend of Geralt who has many useful acquaintances, and he, just like Geralt, wants to destroy the Salamandra. Therefore, after a dialogue with Declan, the White Wolf agrees to join forces in the fight against Salamandra. Declan's reception is even attended by Princess Ada, from whom Geralt recently broke the Striga curse. In her room, the Witcher finds letters linking her to Salamandra. At this point, Geralt needs to decide whether to choose a side in the conflict between the Order and the Skoyatael, or remain neutral and become Alvin's guardian. Additionally, Geralt needs to decide who's more important to him, Shani or Triss. Later, in search of traces of Salamandra, Geralt meets the prison guard who shares information about a dealer of the prohibited substance who can lead him to the laboratory for the production of Fistek, a powerful substance in the form of a white crystalline powder. Wondering why Geralt needs it? The fact is that this substance is actively spreading around the city, and who would you think is behind it? Salamandra, of course. But not only them, but someone from the royal entourage, since the bandits had royal decrees with them. In the documents, Salamandra bandits were allowed to freely engage in this illegal activity. The Witcher deals with the local leaders of Salamandra and gets them special ciphers and clues for Leuvarden. Thanks to them, Declan will soon determine the location of the Salamandra base in Vizima. Meanwhile, Geralt notices bandits negotiating with the king of Redania, Radovid the Stern. But in a personal conversation with Geralt, Radovid assures that he has nothing to do with the intruders. And it is worth noting that his words will be confirmed in the further investigation of The Witcher. On the way to the Salamandra base in the quarantine zone of the trade quarter, The Witcher witnesses the massacre of a werewolf with members of a Salamandra gang. It turns out that this is a werewolf in uniform That is, the werewolf is actually the head of the Vizima guard, Vincent Meis. Geralt is faced with a choice. Kill Meis because he can be dangerous to people, or leave him alive as they fight a common enemy. And if the Witcher decides to choose the latter, he will not regret it. Vincent, in the form of a werewolf, will help Geralt cope with the bandits. When Luvarden finds out the location of the Salamandra base, the sorceress Triss suggests not to delay and go there as soon as possible to finally deal with the bandits. And before breaking into the Salamandra base, Triss Merigold casts a strong protective spell on Geralt, Alzur's Shield. Triss teleports the Witcher to Azarhaved's vault in the dungeon, and Alzur's Shield miraculously saves Geralt from a powerful enemy magic attack. During this battle, Azar escapes through a portal and leaves the Witcher to fight against his accomplice, the Professor.
Javed crumbled in the swamp. He could easily have destroyed me and made off with the spellbook. He lost it, fled. Alzur's shield worked beautifully. Javed ran, leaving the Professor behind. I won't let him escape next time.
Interestingly, the hero does not even have to kill the Professor himself because the local hostess, Kikamor Queen, intervenes in their affairs. Witchers know hundreds of ways to kill a variety of monsters, but in the battle with Kikamor Queen, there's only one effective technique: to escape very quickly. Because of its size, the monster is very slow and clumsy. Therefore, Geralt causes a blockage in the dungeon, which blocks the exit from the cave to its inhabitants and the Professor. By the way, the hero manages to get acquainted with the records seized from the Professor and learns that Princess Ada was preparing a coup d'etat and wanted to remove King Foltest from the throne. It was because of this that the Salamandra had unlimited freedom in Vizima. At the exit of the caves, Geralt meets, who would you think? Princess Ada, who orders the Witcher to be executed in this very place without further ado. However, the sorceress Triss does not allow what was supposed to happen, and in time teleports the Witcher to a remote and relatively safe settlement on the shore of Lake Vizima. Previously, the whole city stood in this place, but over time it went underwater and now exists only in the memories of Geralt. In the end, the Witcher meets the owner of the lake and agrees to her request to reconcile people with water people. In other words, with fish people. To do this, the Witcher needs to get rid of the evil water demon, the legendary Dagon. But this is not so easy because this task is already being performed by another Witcher whose name is Berengar. Yes, it turns out that he is alive. It turns out that it was he who sent the Salamandra bandits to Kaer Morhen, opened the inner structure of the castle to them, and helped them get inside. Berengar himself escaped from the Salamandra and worked for Kalkstein, but they found him. So, to save his skin, Berengar agreed to find a boy named Alvin who has magical powers for the bandits. Now, Geralt must choose whether to kill the traitor or forgive him for this act. In general, what he heard does not please him, but he did not kill his brother in the guild. Instead, he receives a contract from Berengar to kill Dagon and, after defeating him, restores peace between the conflicting parties. After that, Geralt goes to the settlement to meet Alvin, who meanwhile was worried about Alina, the daughter of the mayor, that is, the head of the village, Tobias Hoffman. At this time, the wedding of Alina and Julian, a young and rich merchant from the northern kingdom of Kovir and Povis, was to take place in the village. Tobias was very happy about this wedding, but it didn't happen as expected. On the way to the village, Geralt meets his old friend, the bard Dandelion, who tells him about the planned wedding. In fact, Alina is in love with a local guy named Adam, and her own sister Selena is jealous of Alina and angrily pushes her. Alina hit her head on a rock and died. Then Adam, already engaged, rushed at Selena with a knife and avenged the death of his beloved. Suddenly, the sisters become ghosts. Selena has turned into a night wraith and Alina into a noon wraith girl. It seems that Geralt was in the right place at the right time as the frustrated merchant Julian asks the Witcher for help. He pleads with Geralt to spare his bride and her sister from their suffering. And as soon as Geralt manages to resolve this issue, the settlement is attacked by a group of Scoia'tael, and the troops of the Order of the Flaming Rose come to find them. The hero is forced to finally decide for himself which side he is on. However, while maintaining Witcher neutrality, Geralt takes Alvin so that no one will harm him and decides to move away from the armed confrontation between the two sides. Alvin was afraid of a military conflict and, using his magical powers, teleported somewhere. Geralt and Dandelion do not want to stay caught between two fires, so they decide to sail back to Vizima. As Geralt swims towards the city, he sees that the Vizima he once knew is no longer there. The city was engulfed in flames, the port and neighboring residential areas were on fire. Meanwhile, King Foltest arrives in the capital of Temeria. Hearing that Geralt has returned to the city, the king immediately summons the Witcher to his castle. He informs Geralt that Ada has turned into a Striga again and asks him to cure his daughter. According to the Witcher's companion Triss, someone in Princess Ada's entourage stopped making the amulets Geralt had ordered for her. This is likely the reason Princess Ada turned into a monster again. Geralt agrees to help King Foltest, who in their right mind would refuse to help the king. However, first Geralt decides to end the Salamandra gang. The hero tries to get permission from the Count de Witt, Knight of the Order of the Flaming Rose and advisor to Foltest, to explore the old royal state near Vizima. Due to the connection with the royal entourage, bandits could be hiding in that place. However, Count Roderick de Witt turned out to be a surprisingly unpleasant and arrogant person and refused the Witcher. Geralt then goes to the cemetery to break the curse from Ada, and as a result of this successful operation, he finds a notebook from which he learns that Count Roderick himself put a curse on the princess he was supposed to protect. After telling Foltest's assistant about this, Geralt receives permission from the king to destroy the Salamandra and a hint about the location of Azar Javed. Finally, the main magician of the Salamandra is defeated. Geralt kills Azar Javed and uncovers a terrible truth about this complicated case. It turns out that the gang was not run by Azar. In fact, behind this is the Grand Master of the Order of the White Rose, Jacques de Aldersberg, who betrayed the king to seize power. After returning to Vizima, Geralt passes on all the information received to King Foltest. The ruler is furious and cannot find a situation, but later decides to give Geralt another task, this time the last. The king offers the Witcher a contract to kill the Grand Master, and he is no better than the monsters that inhabit the entire continent.
I do not intend to deceive you. The white frost approaches, a cataclysm that will bury the world beneath snow and ice.
Jacques de Aldersberg believes that the Ithlin's prophecy, predicted by the legendary elven witch and oracle of Ithlin Aegleap Avinian, must come true. The Witcher enters the Order's castle where the Master tries to convince Geralt of the need for a great plan. The prophecy sounds like this. And so shall begin the extinction of the world. Who is far shall die at once. Who is near shall fall from the sword. Who hides shall die of hunger. Who survives shall perish from the frost. Verily I say unto you, the era of the sword and axe is nigh, the era of the wolf's blizzard. The time of the white chill and the white light is nigh. The time of madness and the time of contempt. Ted Tigret, the time of end. The world will die amidst frost and be reborn with the new sun. It will be reborn of elder blood, of Hini Ichaer, of the seed that has been sown. A seed which will not sprout, but burst into flame. Ithlin Agliach Avinian's prophecy. Geralt doesn't believe in prophecy. Therefore, Jacques creates the illusion of a future in which the world is covered with ice and people have turned into monsters. In the icy desert, Geralt is left alone and tries to reach the end of the desert, along the way remembering his friends who helped him all the time. In the end, the Witcher overcame the white chill. He killed the Grand Master, and with him the spirit of King of the Wild Hunt. After examining the Master's body, Geralt finds on it an amulet that he had recently given to Alvin. The Witcher realizes that Jacques de Aldersberg, whom he killed, is actually Alvin, a representative of the Elder Blood. How it happened, we'll tell you in detail in a moment. In the meantime, Geralt returned to the real world and received a generous reward from King Foltest for his work, and also saved him from being attacked by Ezio from Assassin's Creed. That is, it seemed so until Geralt took off the attacker's hood and made sure that it was a Witcher. This story will continue in the next part of the Witcher Games series. In the meantime, let's go back to the unanswered questions and consider the rich lore of the White Wolf game. The Witcher universe is rich and complex enough to be fully covered in one video. It's based on rumors, legends, and beliefs. So just imagine how much Andrzej Sapkowski could come up with in 8 books. And another one is on the way. This is not one clearly spelled out story, but a tapestry of fragmented tales that intertwine and lead in completely different directions. Therefore, unfortunately, we'll not be able to tell you about all the details of the universe, all the legends, and all the characters of the first part of the game, but we will definitely try to make this universe more understandable and interesting for you. Something that we will talk about will be almost a well-known fact, and something that the player can only learn by reading all the notes available in the game. Something may already be related to the third part of the Witcher series, or even be only in the descriptions of cards in the collectible card game Gwent. You should start with the world in which all the events of the franchise unfold. It is called Neverland. a world that never existed. This is exactly what the author Andrzej Sapkowski called this untitled world in an interview. After all, when the Witcher universe was born, there was nothing at all. When magic suddenly appeared and the countdown in the Witcher's world began, magic became the primary source of everything that exists in the world. It is the essence and foundation of the universe, and as the power and boundless energy of magic gradually stabilized, its vortices slowed down and concentrated in one place. There, from the streams of magic, an incredible and beyond the control of man construction of a universal scale was formed, the spiral. The excess energy slowly settled on the sides of the spiral, and so separate worlds began to form. The spiral was filled with various planets and stars, and at the same time, the universe was filled with planes of being, each of which existed on its own, but was connected with the basic physical plane of being. He became a key link in the universe, which time after time is threatened by dark forces that appear in the form of demons or elementals. It sounds pretty complicated, but it's similar to metaphysics in our world, a foundation that explains where life came from. Over time, life began to emerge in different paths of the spiral universe, which with constant development formed the mind. This mind became the most amazing creation of magic, because only intelligent creatures could adapt to the worlds and then subdue them. The first intelligent beings of the universe were representatives of two races in two different worlds, elves and unicorns. And if everything is clear with the latter, then with elves, everything was a little more complicated because they called themselves Ayin Undad and used the oldest elves' dialect, one speech. Unicorns were powerful horses and were the only ones who understood magic and its flow from birth. With the help of magic, they traveled the universe and could end up on any planet in the spiral. Unlike them, elves, and later other intelligent beings, could not leave their own world. Moreover, they did not even know about the existence of other worlds. However, as it turned out, not only unicorns were given an understanding of magic. Over time, the elven people of Ayin Undad were able to master magical energy to almost the same extent as unicorns. Of course, it was quite difficult for them to learn magic, and the process of fully understanding this area took them a long time. But Ayin Undad were incredibly quick-witted and gifted, which allowed them to rapidly develop their own culture and civilization. Later, when Ayin Undad mastered magic at the highest levels, they also mastered portal magic, which allowed them to travel to other worlds and explore new ones. On one of the planets, they could observe the first people. As ancient representatives of Homo sapiens learned to hunt, weave, develop, and create primitive civilizations. At the same time, the elves met unicorns and quickly became friends because both races saw only positive aspects in this union. Perhaps they would have continued to develop in this union, exploring magic and its possibilities, but the world of elves was approaching an unexpected cataclysm. Winter. But it was not an ordinary winter, but the so-called White Frost, comparable to the real ice age that once existed on Earth. Elven sanctuary ruins, forests, and plantations turned into snow-covered wastelands. This led to a global shortage of all kinds of resources, and the people of Ayin Undad were forced to leave their homes. But there was another problem with this. Not all representatives of Ayin Undad had access to knowledge about the magical universe and teleportation. Only a small part of privileged persons. The rest of the people were on the verge of death, so the elves decided to turn to their unicorn friends for help. The unicorns responded and agreed to help such a wonderful race that had evolved so much and approached them. The unicorns created an extremely powerful spell, Ard Gayith, Gates of the Worlds. It was a giant portal for moving through the worlds on a spiral. But where exactly did the portal from the doomed planet Ayin Undad lead? This portal led to a planet that had not yet experienced magic, had not encountered the horrors of the White Frost, and in general was known only to the people who inhabited it, the world of Neverland. When the elves arrived in Neverland, the world seemed completely empty to them. The people of Ayin Undad lost their home and all their possessions, but they survived. Of course, the elves moved to a new planet for more than one day. This process lasted several years and was popularly called the Era of Migration. At the same time, in parallel with the migration, the Ayin Undad people continued to explore the worlds of the spiral, in search of a possible means to overcome the White Frost. Fur coats and shovels? Maybe a flamethrower? Joking aside, it was only a matter of time before a new cataclysm like this. White Frost is a harbinger and one of the causes of the end of the world. Meanwhile, it turned out the Ayin Undad people are not alone in the world of Neverland. The elves met its native inhabitants, the original races of Neverland. That is, not just one, but several intelligent races at once, among which, for example, there were Vrans, an ancient race that formed the first known civilization and lived in the world long before the appearance of elves and humans. They looked like huge, intelligent humanoid lizards with big eyes and scaly skin. The Vrans were highly developed, building beautiful cities and maintaining a well-equipped army. Even after many years, the remnants of their civilization will remind adventurers of the Vrans' former greatness. Why a former? The fact is that the Vran people were almost completely exterminated in the course of hitherto unknown warriors with elves. Almost immediately after the Vrans were killed in their city of Lochmuin, these lands were inhabited by elves. The conflict that occurred between these two peoples is seldom mentioned, but due to the superior power of the more developed elves and their possession of magic, the Vrans were doomed. The elves committed the first genocide in the history of Neverland, a crime they would soon come to regret, as history has a tendency to repeat itself. Another representative of the original races of Neverland are gnomes. Short in stature but quite inventive and developed creatures, originally lived in the dungeons. But with the course of evolution, gnomes came to the surface and adapted to life under the sun near Mount Carbon and the mountains of Mahakam, which work between the kingdoms of Temeria, Edern, Lyria, and Rivia and Salden. Gnomes are quite wise people who have never sought war and have always tried to avoid conflict, so they've chosen neutrality and non-interference in the conflict between Vrans and elves. They improved their skills in working with metals, and even after coming to the elf world, they remained leaders in this field.
The skill of the dwarves was unequaled, fashioning objects of great beauty out of diamond.
Another race of Neverland was the dwarves, who did much the same thing, but unlike gnomes, they were slightly stronger, slightly taller, slightly younger, and more belligerent people. The dwarves appeared in Neverland after all the original races, but before the event that changed everything, the so-called conjunction of the spheres. In fact, this was also a magical cataclysm that occurred about 1500 years ago. However, this time, none of the worlds were covered with snow, haze, ice, or anything similar. This time, they were partly mixed up because the boundaries of the worlds were easily overcome like jelly. As a result, people and many other creatures who had not belonged to this world before appeared in Neverland and became trapped there. More on this later. Also among the original races of Neverland related to gnomes and dwarves belong to the halflings. They are also not very high, but in terms of physical indicators, they occupy a place somewhere in the middle between gnomes and dwarves. They almost do not wear beards, unlike dwarves, and generally look more like humans. But as you can see, no one had any idea about people in those days. The halflings did not share the Mahakam Mountains with anyone, but settled in small villages where they could devote more time to agriculture, which they really liked. The last of the elder races of Neverland were nymphs, which can be divided into dryads, hamadryads, lamoniads, nereids, merpeople, and others. In general, their appearance depends on the type of terrain: forests, waters, mountains, and even air. This is because the nymphs were children of nature and are closely related to it. The nymphs did not interfere in the conflicts of Neverland until they were drawn into these conflicts by others. The nymphs could always fight back against the enemy because the best of all the original races mastered magic, drawing it from all natural sources. This was Neverland, and these were the races that inhabited it when the elves arrived. The conjunction of the spheres has not yet taken place, but the balance of this world has already been disturbed by the appearance of Ayin Ondad in it. With the arrival of the elves, Neverland began to compete for territory, resources. This highly developed race literally hindered the development of others. The course of history was changed, and the world of Neverland was subsequently plunged into chaos. The elves themselves, having escaped from the White Frost and taken away their lands from the Vrans, felt the scale of their influence on this world, their irresistibility and significance. At that time, the elves were indeed the dominant race of the world. The new younger generations of Ayin Ondad, who did not know the White Frost and grew up in times of victories, wanted new journeys, new worlds, discoveries, and achievements. Therefore, the leaders of the people again turned their attention to the Gate of the Worlds, Ard Gaeth. At the same time, the elves forgot that unicorns saved their lives and began to envy the power of unicorns. The younger generation of elves convinced the old of the need for new journeys and expansions, but the old generation was against it. They rejoiced in the peace and tranquility that they had gained. Therefore, there was a split between the young and older elves, and the single people of Ayin Ondad ceased to exist, dividing into the people of the Alders, Ayin El, and the people of the hills, Ayin Sid. The new people of Ayin El left peaceful life and went through the portal Ard Gaeth to new horizons on their white ships. Traveling through the unicorn portal was easy for the elves, and they easily found a new, comfortable planet, a continent that already belonged to humans. The continent is a real, nameless, and personified continent that covers the entire territory of the most interesting world to us, in the context of The Witcher, which extends from the Dragon Mountains to the city of Golden Towers. The city of Nilfgaard, now known by this name, is the capital of the powerful Nilfgaardian Empire, which is half full, but that's still a long way off. Ainel immediately began to dictate their own terms to people, but when people did not want to obey Ainel, they started a war and quickly taught a lesson to innocent people who were much less developed and knew nothing about magic. The elves slaughtered entire human settlements, leaving piles of skeletons on the ground. For some time, humans were forced to obey and serve as slaves to the elves in order to save their lives. The unicorns couldn't forgive Ainel for what they had done to a world they loved to visit, so they got in the way of the elves and decided to save the people. But the attack of the elves was too rapid, and the unicorns did not have time to save the human race from enslavement. Ainel called this world their own, and told everyone to call it that. The unicorns felt responsible for the genocide of humans because they had given the elves salvation and access to the gates of Ardgaith. Therefore, there was only one way to solve all the problems: the war between unicorns and elves. The war was long and brutal, and the Ainel lost. First of all, morally, having lost the ambition and bright future that the people of Ainel dreamed of. Unicorns could fight for a long time because they drew strength from the great spiral universe itself, while elves did not have such strength and such a large number of resources on the planet. So the Ainel were forced to put all their strength into one extremely powerful spell, the Obstruction, a protective spell that essentially ended the war, separating its still controlled portion of the world from the rest of the planet by a huge, impenetrable, and invisible dome that even unicorns could not overcome. But as a result of this spell, one problem arose that radically affected the entire world order. Of course, we're talking about the beginning of a conjunction of the spheres. The Obstruction spell touched the magic of the Great Spiral, and its sphere began to move for the first time in a long while, since the formation of the universe. All existing worlds experienced a large-scale cataclysm called the conjunction of the spheres. Yes, this is the same combination of spheres that we mentioned earlier. The gates of the Ardgaith were completely destroyed, and none of the possible portals were working anymore. But the boundaries between the worlds became very thin, and in some places they disappeared altogether in chaos. Someone was looking for a new home, someone got lost, and someone wanted to get enough of the loot. Monsters from unknown worlds and planets could easily get to other worlds and planets. Yes, the elves' Neverland, seeking peace and quiet, became filled with demons, monstrous beasts, vampires, and humans. And if we were Iron Seed, we would be most afraid of the latter.
Here's Johnny!
Meanwhile, the Ainel made a truce with the unicorns, but there were no more roads for them from the world they thought was their own. Now they were actually locked in their own world, and they could have started to develop there, but like a heavenly punishment, a white frost came to the world of Ainel, and no unicorns will come to their aid this time. It seemed that the elves were doomed to extinction. The truth was different. In the world of Ainel, time passed much more slowly than in other worlds. Therefore, the course of the White Frost was also slower than before on the planet of Ain-Andad. Elven witches and wizards were able to resist this White Frost, although they did not have the strength to completely stop it. They stopped its course even more in order to gain several decades of time for their people to seek salvation. This was enough time for one of the powerful elves of Ainel, whose name was Avalach, to come up with and implement a plan to escape from the freezing planet. Avalach needed someone who could open the portals with his own hands, someone who was born with all the might and power of the entire elfin race. An elf representative was bred under ideal experimental conditions. So Avalach began to bring together pairs of the finest Ainel to merge their genes and create something more powerful and beautiful from elven blood. Some ancient power that will have an elder blood. After all, only a child of the elder blood will be able to open the gates of Ardgaith again. Bringing together more and more generations of Ainel, as a result, Avalach received a beautiful elf, the daughter of the leader of Ainel, Lara Dorn, daughter of the powerful Alder King, Oberon Morkatak, and his wife, Sheadal. Immediately after that, Avalach wondered who to connect Lara with in order to get a true child of the Elder Blood. At the same time, a military structure called Wild Hunt began to be created in the world of Ainel, which the powerful King Oberon planned to use for two reasons. Firstly, Oberon needed an army for the future resettlement of his people. Secondly, he needed new people who still served as slaves in the Ainel world, and it took strength to capture them. This force was the Wild Hunt. The Wild Hunt was led by Winter Queen, an almost original elf of the Ainel genus, who did not want to participate in the experiments of Avalach. In return, she decided to cope with the cataclysm itself and went straight into a blizzard. She was gone for a long time, but soon she came back and was different. With icy white skin, a frozen voice, and eyes without pupils. The elder blood in her veins protected the elf from death, but absorbed some of the power of the white frost. Thus, the elf became half the element of the white frost, partially mastering its power. The elder blood helped the Winter Queen, along with the Wild Hunt, to enter other worlds for a while. So they especially often visited Neverland and abducted people there. Many years later, the Winter Queen will disappear, and her place will be taken by the cruel and almost elder blood's result of Avalok's experiment, Eridan Briachglas, known by the nickname Sparrowhawk. It will be his responsibility to ensure the protection of the INL people until a true child with elder blood is born. But it wasn't meant to be. Let's go back a bit to Neverland, which has changed a lot since the conjunction of the spheres. The beginning of the cataclysm in Neverland was almost immediately noticed by everyone, including the elves of Seed. Many unique creatures began to appear in the world around them which had never been seen before in Neverland. There were goblins, spriggans, chorts, gremlins, godlings, hydras, krakens. For example, among them were anthropomorphic beasts that would later be found in an abandoned village, somewhere deep in the swamps of Velen, and would become known as the Crones. Most of all, vampires have arrived in Neverland, all of which can be grouped into 3 categories: lower, higher, and powerful demigods. The conjunction of the spheres took place for a long time, stretching in time for many years. The elves did not interfere with the changes in Neverland in any way and simply hid in their cities and castles. The climate of the world also changed, which finally killed the race of endangered Vrons. So one of the original races of Neverland disappeared along with the memory of them, and the planets in the orbit of the spiral finally took new, stable places and stopped. There were a lot of monsters in Neverland, thousands of different species who pose a deadly danger to all the races that exist in this world. Monsters are ready to kill all living things for food and devastate entire villages on their way. The indigenous races of Neverland were starving as the populations of livestock and wild animals were rapidly declining. Everyone was forced to adapt and build not big cities with aqueducts and palaces, but dense walls and strong fortresses. But in addition to all the strange creatures or new diseases that came to Neverland during the conjunction of the spheres, a new intelligent race also came to this world, which almost immediately called it its own. It was a race of humans. Rumor has it that they destroyed their former world and therefore came in search of a new home. In any case, people soon began to build the first settlements in Neverland. The people's ships, there were only 3 of them, moored to the banks at the mouth of the Pontar River and at the mouth of the Yaruga River. On those lands, people founded their first settlements, which many years later will become the first 3 human states, Temeria, Redania, and Sintra. And since magic flows into Neverland through the Cataclysm, it also became available to people. Jan Becker was the first person to feel and master magic. He helped the first humans grow crops, controlled weather events, and protected people from bloodthirsty monsters. This was the beginning of the development of human civilization in Neverland. Subsequently, new provinces began to appear, Nazair and Nilfgaard in the south, and the lands that would later become the kingdom of Kovir and Paus in the north. Within a couple of generations, the entire west coast of the continent was full of people, so political life began to form between them. This is already enough to understand how the Witcher universe was formed and what it roughly looks like at the beginning of the game. Actually, many more years have passed since then, and countless events have taken place that cannot be told in the format of one video. The war of the Seed elves and humans, the formation of the Nilfgaardian Empire, and much more. Therefore, in our story, we'll have to jump over a long period of time to tell the most important moments related to the adventures of Geralt in the first part of the game. By the way, who is he? Geralt of Rivia, also known as the White Wolf and Butcher of Blaviken, is a mutant and professional monster hunter for hire. He, like all Witchers, cannot have children. Geralt has superhuman physical abilities, can use basic magic, and is adept at fencing. Geralt's mother was a sorceress, or rather a druid healer, Vasenna, who his father is not known for certain. Shortly after the boy was born, Geralt's mother gave him to the Witchers of the School of the Wolf in Kaer Morhen. There, Geralt went through many complex mutations and passed the herb test to become one of the best.
What's your name?
Geralt.
Like Geralt. Nice.
Thanks to his brilliant academic success, Geralt was selected for additional mutation experiments and became the only Witcher who managed to survive these experiments at all. His completely white hair is a side effect of recent mutations. After completing his studies, Geralt received Witcher swords and a medallion and went in search of earnings and adventures. According to the plot of the first part of the game, Geralt explores the Mage's Tower located in the center of the swampy forest area of Vizima. According to legend, once upon a time a mage lived in the swamps. Day after day, he sat over his books in search of a magic stone that would turn lead into gold and spring water into moonshine. But the gods didn't like it. So one night, a terrible storm hit the mage's tower, destroying it to its core. The mage built himself a new tower, and so that it could withstand the weather, he put a special spell on it. Then one night, the earth itself was outraged by the actions of the mage and broke his tower. But the mage built another tower and cast a spell on it that prevented the earth from breaking it. No more heaven or earth could harm the mage. But one day, he suddenly disappeared. The reasons were unknown, but it was said that either his disciple or his creatures had rebelled against the sorcerer. However, the tower remains closed to this day, and no one knows what is in it. But it will be even more interesting to learn about a strange boy named Alvin, and why exactly he plays one of the main roles in the plot of the first part of The Witcher. It is worth recalling that Alvin's body contains older blood which once flowed through the veins of elves. He's the source. Of course, over time the elder blood began to lose its power, so not every source creature is born with amazing magical abilities. And even more so, not everyone has magical power associated with the gene of the elven sorceress Lara Doran, who had the gene of elder blood. However, those units who still survived such a mutation have incredible abilities. They can travel through space and time, but their abilities are difficult to control and usually manifest under the influence of stress, experiences, or strong emotions. There have been cases in history where these abilities have thrown a person from place to place and in time. Therefore, the Source Children are closely monitored by the Brotherhood of Sorcerers, which take care of their safety. It seems that the Brotherhood was watching Alvin so-so. The fact is that the main antagonist in the first part of the game, Jacques de Aldersberg, is Alvin. How this happened is not difficult to guess. Faced with all the inhumanity and cruelty of the world around him, Alvin teleported from the picturesque murky waters to the past and founded the Order of the Flaming Rose. Knowing that the Witchers have unique powers, Alvin organized a detachment of Salamandra and stole mutagens from Kaer Morhen to create an army of Witchers and seize power in Temeria. Somehow, by the end of the first part of the game, its lore looked like this: multifaceted, exciting, and unique. So we'd like to stay in this universe a little longer, but we need to move on because ahead of us is waiting for a gameplay full of interesting mechanics. More than 15 years have passed since the release of the first part of the Witcher game. The developers have released 2 full-fledged sequels and several interesting add-ons to them, but even after that you can often hear that the first Witcher is the best. If we analyze why someone might think this way, we ultimately come to the gameplay that CD Projekt Red created with all its love for the book canon and iconic representatives of the RPG genre. During the passage of the game, you can feel the love for The Witcher from Sapkowski's stories at every step. You can feel the soul that the developers invested in every mechanic, location, and story task. First of all, it's worth noting the high-quality soundtrack, which affects the overall atmosphere of the game and differs from the soundtracks in subsequent parts of the series. The mesmerizing sound of ethnic motifs, enhanced by a batch of bow and wind instruments, takes the player back to an ancient era with fantastic castles, supernatural powers, sword battles, and magic permeating everything around them. Paweł Blaszczak and Adam Skorupa were responsible for the music in the game. Paweł started writing music in his youth when in 1982 he bought a home computer Commodore 64. In 1995, he and his friend Adam decided to create his own company, PressX Sound, which will be engaged in writing music for the design of video games, movies, and advertising. 10 years later, Paweł and Adam took part in the creation of the Witcher soundtrack. In fact, at that time, it was his most iconic work on music for video games. Blaszczak wrote most of the musical compositions while Skorupa mainly worked on the soundtrack. Perhaps no one can argue that the music in the game is simply fabulous. No wonder at the Best Original Score ceremony from IGN, The Witcher soundtrack won first place. In the future, Paweł Blaszczak did not compose music for The Witcher, so things changed, but more on that another time. To date, we can say that the main problems of the first Witcher are the combat system and a complex system of leveling up the character. Although at the time of the release, the game had quite interesting mechanics and innovative ideas. In total, the game has 3 battle styles, between which the player must switch already during the battle itself. Each style is useful against a specific type of opponent. For example, nimble enemies should be defeated using a fast style, stocky ones with a power style, and various footy food with a group style that deals damage over an area. Who would have thought that this particular group style of punches would be enough to complete the entire game? After all, the developers have designed the game so much that the main character is almost always attacked in groups, packs, and detachments. Therefore, fast and strong punches are not often useful, and since there are leveling branches for all combat styles in the game, it makes almost no sense to invest in pumping fast and strong blows. Moreover, Geralt has 2 swords. The first one is steel. It's used to fight people and creatures made of flesh and blood. And the second one is silver. It's designed to destroy monsters of magical and supernatural origin. And most importantly, the fighting styles are upgraded separately for the regular steel and silver sword. That is, in fact, the player has 6 levels. The Witcher can deliver combo strikes if the player clicks the mouse on the enemy in time. The game even has finishing techniques, parrying, and jumping over the enemy. But this happens automatically at a certain point in the battle, so you'll not be able to jump over the enemy over and over again. On the one hand, the variety of features available in the game affects the dynamism and monotony of the gameplay. The player can try something new and is less likely to get bored with the game. But at the same time, too many gameplay features confuse the player. Therefore, the ability to upgrade styles in The Witcher, where a maximum of 3 out of 6 will be useful, makes the entire combat system in the game terribly balanced and overloaded. However, let's look at the pumping system in more detail. For each completed task and killing an opponent, the player gets experience points. After gaining a certain number of them, the character gets a new level and talents that are used to learn skills. These talents come in 3 types: bronze, silver, and gold, like metals. Bronze talents are available from level 0, silver talents from level 15, and you need to develop gold talents up to level 30. However, you can only pump in a couple of gold talents for the entire game, but you'll want to exchange bronze talents for something more useful in the middle of the game because they'll have nowhere to put them. And interestingly, the player will not be able to upgrade to level 30 in a couple of hours of conditional killing of wolves in the forest. After all, the developers built the gameplay so that the plot of battles can be counted on your fingers, and almost the entire gameplay of The Witcher consists of going there, talking to someone, learning something, going back, retelling what you heard, and moving on. Well, that is from dialogues, and that's a good thing. The dialogues in the game were just great. This is probably the best thing in the game, because learning a story in conversations with characters is just as interesting as reading this story in Sapkowski's books. They're well written, intriguing, and generally not boring. Only towards the end of the game do the number of dialogues decrease slightly, giving Geralt a bit more reason to swing his sword. In addition, the player can strengthen their character in battle with a variety of potions as another important part of the gameplay. In addition to dialogues and battles is alchemy. The player can create potions that increase health, stamina, or regeneration, allow them to see in the dark, or give other positive effects. Recipes for these potions can be learned from scrolls or simply experimentally by creating an unknown potion by yourself. Once the potion is created, it can be drunk, but if the potion fails, it will poison the player or give Geralt negative effects. In general, every time Geralt drinks a potion, it increases the level of toxicity in his body. Toxicity can be reduced by drinking a special potion or simply meditating in a tavern or around a campfire. In addition to potions, the player can create oils designed to increase sword damage. You can also create small bombs and use them in battle. Some skills in the game also require special potions. So, in general, alchemy is an integral part of the game, which is endowed with a lot of interesting mechanics. One of them, for example, is responsible for the fact that alchemy can only be used in meditation mode, obviously in order to somehow limit the player in this. Still, crafting a potion for yourself at the time of a difficult battle would not be right. Another interesting mechanic in the game is a special Witcher magic signs that Geralt can use for specific purposes, both in battle and during his own investigation. The hero will receive signs during the game using special circles of power, or in other words, elemental circles. So, for example, Geralt can master the Ard, a telekinetic impulse to repel enemies and break objects. Another sign, Quen, creates a protective field around the Witcher, which makes him invulnerable to enemy attacks for a while. An interesting sign is Erden, which creates a magic trap on Earth and deals damage to enemies around them, sometimes even imposing long-term negative effects on them. Also, a powerful sign in battle is Igni, which allows Geralt to cast fireballs. Just kidding. It would be nice, but even without fireballs from Igni, the Witcher attacks the enemy with fire and can light bonfires if necessary. And finally, a very useful sign is Axi, which can affect the mind of monsters and opponents with a telepathic wave, forcing them to submit or run away.
Got a better idea. You're all gonna count to 100. Got it? 3, 4, 5, 6.
It's also worth noting an interesting game idea of the developers. Mini games that will become a mandatory part of the Witcher universe, and one of these games, Gwent, will generally become a separate game with the studio. In the first part of The Witcher, there were 3 minigames: Fist Fight, Drinking Contest, and Dice Poker, which in the sequels replaced the card Gwent. For the game Drinking Contest, the developers did not create a separate quest. Geralt sacrifices his own health and gets drunk in alcohol fights with anyone without even earning experience points for winning. However, Geralt can put anything on the line: his own money, weapons, books, or valuable information that his opponent has. The goal of this booze is simple: to get your opponent drunk and not fall from intoxication. And if the main character constantly loses to gravity, it is not superfluous to spend 1 bronze talent and pump up alcohol resistance. Fistfight's a quite clear and simple game, and most importantly, this is the easiest way to earn money in the game. Just punch your opponent in the face. Geralt will not be able to dodge during the battle, but he will be able to block all the blows of opponents until the character runs out of energy. The player will also not have to aim because the player has auto-aiming for this. The player just needs to strike the opponent in time and give Geralt a little rest.
First, distract target. Then block his blind jab. Counter with cross to left cheek.
But Dice Poker is a game invented by the dwarves. It becomes available to Geralt as soon as the player receives the corresponding quest and finds dice for the game, which are scattered throughout Vizima. The goal of the game is to get the best possible combination of dice from the existing ones in real poker. 1 pair, 2 pair, a set, a low straight from 1 to 5, a high straight from 2 to 6, a full house, which is a combination of a pair and a set, 5 of a kind, 4 identical ones, and a flush, 5 identical ones. Of course, this minigame cannot be called a full-fledged reference to real poker, but even so, the game has enough generosity and references to real art and pop culture. The developers hid interesting Easter eggs in the dialogues of the characters and images surrounding the hero. For example, several references to medieval art can be found at the beginning of the game, in the Fortress of Kaer Morhen. In general, the interior of the fortress is quite familiar, but among all the grayness of the walls, there are several beautiful frescoes. The fresco on which the Witcher George kills the dragon refers to a real painting from 1470 by the Italian artist Paolo Uccello, which is actually called St. George and the Dragon. Opposite this mural, you can find another one when approaching, which the character says,
"Seems witches have always been better with a sword than with a paintbrush."
Witchers practice better with swords than with brushes. The mural depicts a witcher fighting snakes, and this is nothing more than an homage to a real sculpture in Rome called Laocoon and his sons, the find of which dates back to 1506. The third fresco in the fortress with a rider on a horse is very similar to a real painting by the French artist Gustave Moreau called St. George and the Dragon. Separately, it's worth noting a full-fledged location in the closed old cemetery in Vizima. This location closely resembles the 1810 painting The Abbey in the Oakwood by the German landscape artist Caspar David Friedrich. The rest of the images in the game are not so large-scale. These include portraits and posters that can be found wandering around Vizima. For example, among them you can see a poster with a soldier pointing a finger in front of him and calling for joining the ranks of the army. It resembles real posters with Uncle Sam in the United States, which existed during the British-American War of 1812. Also, in the houses of the city, Geralt can see framed portraits with a man in a red outfit. Here, the developers left a real Easter egg in the game, taking a portrait of one of the famous commanders of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth of the 17th century, Stefan Czarniecki, by the artist Brodero Matheson. They placed one of the directors of the CD Projekt Red studio in Czarniecki's place, and in general, it's worth saying that most of the main and secondary characters have the faces of real developers in the company in the first part of The Witcher. And you can also hear interesting Easter eggs in the game because they were placed in dialogues. For example, if you listen to the villagers who go about their business, you can hear them whistling the easily recognizable musical theme of Darth Vader from Star Wars. Children playing on the street sometimes start singing a counting song, which is very similar to the famous counting song from the series of films about Freddy Krueger. The last, but no less interesting reference in the game that we'll consider is a phrase the player can hear from one druid with a long beard in the forest on the swamps. If you talk to a druid, he'll certainly ask Geralt if he's looking for a special potion that gives strength. This can be considered a direct reference to the magic potion of power in this series of cartoons and films about Asterix and Obelix, which is prepared for the Gauls by a druid. As you can see, the game has many great moments, and a lot of it was crafted with care and passion, but it was not without drawbacks. The most noticeable drawback of the first part of The Witcher can be called poor animation of characters and visual production of dialogues. CD Projekt Red's lack of sufficient experience in game design during the development of their first game affected the creation of characters. The antagonists turned out to be a little cliched and empty, the boy Alvin received less attention than he should have in the plot, and the characters of Geralt and Triss were incomplete according to the developers themselves. Triss, with her heavy personality, was generally more like Yennefer, who will only appear in sequels to the series. Therefore, for the second part of The Witcher, the characters were redesigned. Apparently, it was the lack of experience, along with financial constraints and publisher pressure, that caused the first Witcher game from CD Projekt Red to age so quickly. Today, the game is still very interesting, but already quite difficult to play, and that is why Polish developers thought about creating a remake of the first original game. The Witcher remake should get an open world instead of chamber locations and sequential acts of the original. However, when it will be released is not yet known, so we'll definitely talk about it, but another time. In the meantime, it's time to go back to the moment when the first Witcher just appeared on the shelves of stores. What was its release like? Interesting. By the way, if you like this video and want to see the continuation of our immersion in the Witcher universe, support it with a like and subscribe to our channel. This helps a lot in the development of PressX, and if you're looking forward to a remake and a full-fledged new part of Geralt's adventures, write to us about it in the comments, and we'll definitely make a new video about them. On October 26, 2007, the first part of the game about the White Wolf Witcher Geralt of Rivia was released. However, it was difficult to call it successful at that time. In terms of the number of bugs, the game could easily compete with Stalker Shadow of Chernobyl. The game could just crash every hour, and given the length of the loading screens, this was a critical issue. The only correct solution in this situation was to go through the game regularly, keeping progress and waiting for patches from the developers. In addition, Marcin Iwinski felt that conquering the American market would be a task with an asterisk. You need to spend a lot of money to at least be noticed. After the game was released in Poland, Marcin flew to the United States to meet with representatives of Atari. The meeting was taking place in New York, so he visited several game stores located in Manhattan and noticed individual copies of the game on the bottom shelf in the penultimate section. However, regardless of poor marketing, the game itself found its audience. Marcin recalls that The Witcher entered the US market sometime in October 2007 and began to give results the following year.
In October, in the first quarter, we were all disappointed, I think. And then the game started getting awards.
Right.
And the second quarter of sales was better than the first one.
Wow.
This doesn't happen normally. It's it just shows that they didn't push it enough at the beginning, so it's sort of like the organic pickup and word of mouth kind of made it sell. But still, I think in the US it was considered more like a hardcore, like Dark Souls kind of. Have you played The Witcher? Yeah, it's hardcore shit, man. I'm tough, yeah.
The game started receiving awards, one by one. The game's cinematic opening video was nominated for the 2007 VES Awards in the category Outstanding Pre-Rendered Visuals in a Video Game. In the same 2007 year, the game's soundtrack was selected as Best Fantasy Game Soundtrack at the Radio Rivendell Fantasy Awards. Also that year, at the 11th Annual Interactive Entertainment Awards, the Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences nominated The Witcher for Role-Playing Game of the Year. But still, the victory in that category was quite deservedly won by Mass Effect. It's interesting that all this time in the world, the project was called Wiedźmin. But when the game finally gained worldwide fame, the company decided to change the name Wiedźmin to the English one proposed by Adrian Kimlars. So the game officially became The Witcher. And this very world fame was gained quite quickly. This was a huge success for a small Polish studio. In just a year, CD Projekt Red broke into the top division and got the opportunity to compete with well-known world-class studios. However, let's not rush things. In May 2007, fans of the Linux operating system posted an online petition from CD Projekt Red and asked them to develop a Linux version of the game. The petition was signed by more than 5,000 people. However, Polish developers were not attracted by Linux, and instead they made a port of the game for macOS and announced plans to port the game to PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 consoles. This happened after the celebration of the first anniversary of the release of The Witcher and overcoming the mark of 1 million sales of the game. Already in December 2008, development of the console version of the game started. According to Adam Kaczynski, the new CEO of CD Projekt Red, the only thing that was borrowed from the PC version of the game was the plot. Everything else was created from scratch and largely remade to get an RPG for consoles in the final result. Kaczynski has worked for the company since 2004 and served as head of the development department for 6 years. Michał Kaczynski, co-founder of CD Projekt Red and Adam's brother, agreed and said in an interview that the company will continue to release games on PC. The console port was scheduled for release in the fall of 2009 and was being developed gradually by the French studio Widescreen Games, presumably to avoid delaying the development of the sequel, which was being worked on by the Polish developers at that time. But the situation was not the best. The console project for The Witcher was cancelled, leading to a conflict between the two companies. According to Widescreen Games, CD Projekt Red delayed their payments. In response, Michał Kaczynski from CD Projekt Red stated that they always paid on time and the French partners failed to develop the game on schedule, compromising the planned quality of the project. According to rumors, Widescreen Games allegedly only made it appear as if they were actively working and instead spent the money allocated by the Poles on the port's development. Actually, be that as it may, the company stopped cooperating and there was no Witcher port for consoles. Meanwhile, the Witcher publisher Atari decided to write off the cost of developing the port from CD Projekt Red. Soon, a global economic crisis struck the entire video game industry. The Polish company was forced to completely cancel the Witcher console project and another unknown franchise project, leading to employee layoffs within the company. It was one of the most difficult moments in the company's history. Of the once 350 employees, CD Projekt Red now has less than 200 remaining. The studio was hanging in the balance from bankruptcy due to a debt to Atari of $2 million allocated for the development of the port, and investors who were willing to invest $2 million in the company in return offered to leave developers only 5% of the company's shares. CD Projekt Red could not agree to this under any circumstances. According to Marcin Nowinski, he preferred to declare bankruptcy to the team. The company was made to cancel the Czech and Hungarian localizations of The Witcher in order to reduce costs, and only later, CD Projekt Red found an investor who agreed to invest in the company, leaving them the entire stake. Another interesting fact is that in December 2007, the Polish website Gaminator published an interview with film director Uwe Ball, who liked to make and produce films based on games. In the interview, Ball planned to think about the film adaptation of The Witcher, but in response to this statement, CD Projekt contacted the series' father, Andrzej Sapkowski, and he made it clear that no one would allow Uwe Ball to shoot The Witcher. Apparently, a few years later, Netflix came to Andrzej immediately with money.
Money, Baba. Yeah?
Right, so you're giving me 1,000.
This is an English saying, Baba. Money is money.
In 2008, at the Video Game Developers Conference, CD Projekt Red announced an improved, expanded edition of the game. The game was released in September of that year, and it underwent significant changes. More than 200 new game animations, new NPC models, changing the color scheme of NPCs and monsters, fixing bugs and dialogues, and partially expanding them in translated versions of the game. In addition, all existing bugs have been fixed, inventory has been redesigned, and game stability has been improved. Overall, the game's loading time was reduced by almost 80%. In addition, 2 new adventures have become available to players, Side Effects and The Price of Neutrality. In the case of Side Effects, events unfold in Vizima, a year after Geralt first calmed down Striga. Geralt finds himself in prison again, but this time, in order to save his longtime friend Dandelion from it, according to the bard, he flirted with the wrong women, and now a very influential nobleman wants to cut off his head. However, when Geralt begins to look for ways to save Dandelion, he learns new details and reasons why Dandelion is in prison. The Price of Neutrality is a slightly more complex game add-on. In the story, Geralt returns to spend the winter in Kaer Morhen, where he usually rests with other Witchers. Kaer Morhen is usually quiet, although Geralt is expecting another calm winter. He notices a small camp with a group of soldiers near the fortress. It turns out that the sorceress, Sabrina Glefzig, is looking for the mysterious Deidre Adamine. Moreover, there's a royal conspiracy, an ancient curse, and a surprise child hidden in this case. So, Geralt has to answer the question: what is the price of neutrality? The expanded edition of The Witcher Enhanced Edition includes a DVD with materials on how the game was created, a CD with 29 game soundtracks, the original story, The Witcher from the collection, The Last Wish, and a printed map of Temeria. This publication cost the studio an investment of $1 million, but allowed the Polish studio to return the money spent on development. As of December 2008, the expanded version of the game has sold 300,000 copies worldwide. We created The Witcher with the intent of becoming an acclaimed and successful development studio that always made games for its fans. We spent more than $11 million developing The Witcher and the Enhanced Edition, and it sure is nice to make some of that money back. In addition, the development of the game in Poland and its sales in the Western market played into the hands of CD Projekt Red, which paid its employees a Polish salary in zlotys and received significant profits in US dollars. It was thanks to this earned fortune that the company bought out the entire Metropolis studio, which even before CD Projekt Red tried to develop The Witcher. Thus, the company has expanded its staff with already quite experienced employees. And given that due to the economic crisis, layoffs and burnouts, half of CD Projekt Red's old employees left the company immediately after the game was released, the takeover of Metropolis Software strengthened CD Projekt Red in a very timely manner. In general, analyzing the release of the first game of the newly created Polish studio, we can state a large number of problems. Not very large sales volumes, only 1.5 million copies of the first part of the game sold at the time of 2010, and probably insufficient profits. But it was a success. The company has laid the first stone in the foundation of its powerful and bright future. The world learned about CD Projekt Red. The Witcher book series has received a decent and high-quality game adaptation, a game that respects the book canon, which has made millions of new fantasy users and fans fall in love with its universe. And the developers themselves did not go bankrupt and realize their dream, turning it into reality. It was a success that gave the team self-confidence and motivation to continue working. Therefore, already having enough experience and ready-made first game about The Witcher, the developers took up the development of the continuation of the series. On September 18, 2009, CD Projekt Red officially announced that they had begun work on a sequel to The Witcher 2: Assassins of Kings. But we'll talk about this in the next video dedicated to the ups and downs of The Witcher series. Somehow, this is the story of an ambitious dream game from a small Polish studio of adventurers entrepreneurs. This is the story of the first part of The Witcher, a game that influenced not only the development of its own franchise, but also the RPG genre as a whole. The Witcher showed the whole world what a fantasy game can look like and proved that if you want something very much, it can easily be achieved, even without Axii. Therefore, we, also without Axii, offer you to watch another interesting video that just appeared on your screen. Or you can choose any video on our channel that you haven't seen yet. Thank you for watching this video to the end. Support it with likes and comments, and then we say goodbye. It was PressX. See you soon.